Section 20 of A to Z. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A to Z by Various. Chapter 7. Social Character of the Beverage. From Tea, Its Mystery and History by Samuel Phillips Day. Since the introduction of tea into England, but more especially since the British public has patronized it, a marked improvement characterizes the tone and manners of society. It is not possibly too great an assumption to assert that there must exist something about tea specially suitable to the English constitution and climate, for not even in Scotland or Ireland, nor in any European country, is the beverage consumed to a like extent. Certain travelers aver that a large consumption of the leaf obtains in Russia, but it is chiefly the upper classes who are addicted to its use. The moujiks, peasants and artisans, scarcely know the taste of it, for now, as in the time of Peter the Great, they regard vodka as their only national drink. That all classes of the community in this country have derived much benefit from the persistent use of tea is placed beyond dispute. It has proved, and still proves, a highly prized boon to millions. The artist at his easel, the author at his desk, the statesman fresh from an exhaustive oration, the actor from the stage after fulfilling an arduous role, the orator from the platform, the preacher from the pulpit, the toiling mechanic, the wearied laborer, the poor governess, the tired laundress, the humble cottage housewife, the votary of pleasure even, on escaping from the scene of revelry, nay, the queen on her throne, have, one and all, to acknowledge and express gratitude for the grateful and invigorating infusion. Shortly after it had become fashionable to partake of tea, persons of quality in England were wont to invite their friends to a dish of the newly imported beverage. Lord Macaulay mentions how tea, which at the time Monk brought the army of Scotland to London, A.D. 1660, had been handed round to be stared at and just touched with the lips as a great rarity of China, was 80 years later a regular article of import, and was soon consumed in such quantities that financiers began to consider it as an important source of revenue. 7 years later, Pepys has this entry in his famous diary: "Home, and there find my wife making of tea, a drink which Mr. Pelling, the apothecary, tells her is good for her cold." That Queen Anne ranked among the votaries of the leaf is manifest from Pope's couplet: "Thou great Anne, whom 3 realms obey, doth sometimes counsel take, and sometimes tay." From this time forth writers of renown make constant allusions to the new drink. Essayists in the Spectator, the Tatler, and other literary organs are ever dropping remarks respecting the tea table. Pope, in his Rape of the Lock, when Belinda is declaring what terrible things she would rather have had happen than have lost her favorite curl, makes her cap everything but the wish that she could be transported to some isle where the gilt chariot never marks the way, where none learn Ambre, none ever drink Boe. Than which privation she can imagine nothing worse. Then what a source of social pleasure the afternoon tea becomes! Brady, in his well-known metrical version of the Psalms, thus illustrates the advantages accruing therefrom: "When in discourse of nature's mystic powers and noblest themes we pass the well-spent hours, whilst all around the virtues' sacred band and listening graces pleased attendants stand, thus our tea conversations we employ, where with delight instruction we enjoy, quaffing without the waste of time or wealth the sovereign drink of pleasure and of health." The poet Cooper's praise of the beverage has been sadly hackneyed. Nevertheless, as the laureate of the tea table, his lines are worthy of future reproduction. Who cannot recall how Mrs. Gilpin scornfully characterizes her neighbors' children as being markedly inferior to her own, as hay is to bohea, as though the force of comparison could no further go. Yet it is in his more serious and didactic poem that the melancholy friend of the Hares exclaims, "Now stir the fire, and close the shutters fast, let fall the curtain, wheel the sofa round, and while the bubbling and loud hissing urn throws up a steaming column, and the cups that cheer but not inebriate wait on each, so let us welcome peaceful evening in." But tea had its avowed enemies no less than its staunch friends. Certain old-fashioned physicians did not like it, nay, they even sneered at it and denounced it. Jonas Hanway, the philanthropic but eccentric founder of the Marine and Magdalen Societies, more bold than his compeers, actually rushed into print in order to inveigh against it. But he had reason to regret his hot-headed impetuosity. In answer to his petty attack, the beverage found a noble defender in no less a personage than Dr. Johnson, whose defense in point of style is among the best essays the great moralist ever penned. Hanway, however, nothing daunted, resumed the attack. Having lost his temper, he gave full scope to his prejudices, and denounced tea as the worst of poisons and the secondary cause of all the moral, religious, and political evils that distracted mankind. Not only so, but he was rash enough to attack the Leviathan of literature personally. Yet he had far better had saved his ink, for Johnson, the first time in his life that he had retorted on an adversary, fell upon him like an avalanche. Hanway, having foolishly laid himself open to ridicule, most assuredly the doctor did not spare him. Such a contest, of course, could not be regarded as equal. No possible comparison existed between the combatants. Therefore, setting aside all the hard knocks which Johnson administered to poor Jonas, it will be sufficient to produce one passage in which the eminent writer declares himself a hardened sinner in the use of the infusion of this plant, whose teapot had no time to cool, who with tea solaced the midnight, and with tea welcomed the morning. There is not the slightest exaggeration in this confession. What is affirmed therein is attested both by Boswell and Mrs. Thrall in their respective writings, who record that Dr. Johnson frequently exceeded a dozen large cups at one meal. It is alleged that the first command given by our gracious Queen upon her accession to the throne was, "Bring me a cup of tea and the Times." It is to be hoped that Her Majesty got the former uncoloured. For a time it appears that so far as one class of the community was concerned, the use of tea was likely to be checked by the imperious sway of inconstant fashion. It became the custom in the houses of the aristocracy to supply only coffee after dinner, so that for a period tea was ostracized. Recently, however, a reaction has set in, for we find that the most agreeable meetings in society are those which assemble at the 5 o'clock tea. Accordingly, one of the whirligigs of time has so conspired that, while the fashionable breakfast and dinner hours are completely revolutionized, the hour for tea has reverted to the precise period of the day at which it used to be taken 100 years ago. Although noble ladies have not now black pages to hand round the teacups, yet the very china used by their great-grandmothers is called into requisition simply because of its antiquity. One circumstance calls for special notice. It is this, that in the words of Dr. Johnson, everywhere unintoxicating and non-narcotic beverages are in general use among tribes of every color, beneath every sun, and in every condition of life. The custom, therefore, must meet some universal want of our common nature. Philanthropists and sociologists are now fully alive to the moral effects produced by such non-intoxicant drinks as tea and coffee. Intemperance is the bane of the nation, and now that legislation has utterly failed to restrain the evils arising therefrom, philanthropy, full of faith in the experiment, endeavors by the establishment in divers quarters of quite a different class of public houses to arrest an evil which is assuming the gravest character; and there can be no doubt that if the masses could be induced to substitute the pure beverages, tea and coffee, for the deleterious fluids they are wont to imbibe, the country would be vastly benefited by the salutary change. Section 21.